Hello and welcome to the Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. Each week, the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in finance take you beyond the numbers and hype, right to the heart of the big issues of the day. This week on the show, we're concluding our special season of programmes, bringing you more Nobel perspectives, insights from Nobel laureates in the economic sciences, whose vast knowledge helps to inform UBS's approach to answering the big questions that shape our world. In recent weeks, we've enjoyed more fantastic insights from 3 such laureates, discussing market volatility and going on to reflect on their own experiences in crafting economic knowledge for the real world. Last time we heard about that craft from the great David Card, Professor of Economics at the University of California, Berkeley, who jointly won the 2021 prize for his contributions in the field of labour economics. Here's a little of what he had to say about his start in the field.
Well, in my case, it's kind of accidental. I was a physics major in college, and in my 3rd year, my girlfriend at the time was taking economics and asked me to help her with some of the formulas in the textbook. And I sort of started reading the textbook and found it very interesting. And at the same time, I think I was beginning to realize I was not going to be a world-leading physicist by any stretch. So I got kind of interested in economics and found a way to kind of weasel into an introductory class that was actually taught by the person who'd written this textbook. And so I came to it largely by accident.
David Card. We also heard from Daron Acemoglu about his principles for crafting deep economic knowledge and the qualities that have driven his journey.
I think success in many fields requires luck. You need to be at the right place at the right time. You need to have the right interests and skills for the questions that are feasible, interesting, and in vogue at the time. So I've been lucky. My interests and my approach could have led to a complete failure, but things have worked out. But I think one thing that helped me was I was genuinely interested in these questions. I was enthusiastic about them. I was passionate about them. And I think that's a very important ingredient as well. You can be cynical. You can say, this is not what I want. I had this organization, I had this topic, I had this focus, but I'll do it just to earn money or to be successful. Yeah, sometimes people can pull that off, but it's not that easy. It's much better and much more satisfying to work on something you're passionate about.
Daron Acemoglu. But the last word for our special series goes to Bengt Holmström. Holmström, the 2016 Nobel Prize winner, alongside Oliver Hart for their contributions to contract theory and the potential pitfalls of contract design, is here once again, and it's a great pleasure to welcome him back. Bengt Holmström, we've heard already from David Card and Daron Acemoglu, but we'd like to hear from you about the spark that led to your interest in this field, and in particular, I guess, your interest in incentives.
Well, I'm an accidental economist. I never thought I would be even an academic, perhaps, but let alone an economist. But so I went after my undergraduate degree, which was, mathematics and statistics and physics. I went to work on, it was called operations researcher at the time, and to one of the biggest companies in Finland. It's a conglomerate, it had 30 factories, in fact, not just in Finland, in other places of the world. And I was supposed to design or implement what was called at the time a corporate planning model, a big linear programming model. It's good to think back in those days, because then also they thought that, this is a new tool. This company was one of the first to have a own big computer that filled, I would say, 200 square meter room, and the power in today's measures is less than what we have in our pocket, but there was punch cards, and there was a whole chain of things that had to be done, and it overnight runs and so on. So with this machinery, they wanted me to sort of create a big planning model that would cover 5 years forward, all the 30 factories and their interactions and all. And you can do that. I mean, that wasn't the problem. You could do that. But pretty soon, as I started to collect data for this, to see, the computer, the program needs data, linear programming. it's an unusual way of that are typically of the form, how much would you get of product X if you had this many people and this many, that's my money and so on. So it's sort of a resource based. And so there are bottlenecks and so on that get priced by this linear program. It's a beautiful model. It's actually a very economic model. But I realized that these people, we ask them data that they don't sort of routinely collect. To the extent they even collect it, it's kind of bureaucratic. It's not measured. A lot has to do with what's the sort of load on the factory, say, at this moment. And then you might want to do this rather than that because there's bottlenecks. Where are the bottlenecks? How valuable are the bottlenecks? All those things are, in some sense, ignored by the standards that they use. We need this many people on this project in this time. So I realized that the mapping from what they used and what they knew and could deliver in terms of data was woefully inadequate. And to some extent they also distorted some of it because they were thinking that I was 24 years old, they thought this little boy has been sent by the CFO, so we have to listen to him. But what should we tell him in terms of this data in order to get our investments done and the resources we want? So that's where my interest in incentives was born.
Maybe talk to us a little bit about how that experience set you up for the next phase of you mastering your craft. What came next after that operations experience?
That was what got me into it. And then I went to Stanford. I was thinking of, maybe staying to do a PhD in operations research, which was my field. But then I got interested in economics. I don't exactly remember why, but I went and listened to some economics classes. And I asked them, do you know anything about incentives and so on? And it turned out that just at that time, incentives started to be sort of as a theory, so to speak, of interest. So economics became very interested in these information issues, and incentives is very much sort of information issue. How do you know how hard I worked or how cleverly I worked and so on, and so it was just a very fortunate kind of combination that I was in. I had thought about this from entirely sort of practical experience, and then this was just sort of, Stanford became actually one of the real centers. So it was quite a coincidence. But that's, of course, everything is always exposed to coincidence because something has to happen. and so if it hadn't happened, then I wouldn't be here. But it was, that colored my whole career in some sense. I always went back typically. First of all, I always stayed with some businesses. So I have been on the board of Nokia, and I went to the business school at Stanford, so I have had a foot in one way or another, thanks to these 2 years at the Finnish company originally. I have had always a foot in this, in business, and I sort of, very often I still go back and sort of project it to the experiences I had there. Because it was with 30 companies, I didn't see all of them, or sort of factories, but you really saw a cross-section of how things are done. Because I had to model the whole economic and the activity side of the business, both the financial activity side. So it was actually a wonderful education about how, in those days, a huge company operates, and all the way to how the CFO, thinks about it. And so he was a fantastic man. He was a terrific mentor. This was over 100-year-old company. So, they had paper and pulp was the kind of biggest thing. They had a huge kind of concentration in all the pieces that relate to paper and pulp and, you name it. And that was kind of one very big, but they also had, Iittala glass, which you may know, that was one of their little things that they bought. So they bought into a lot of sort of pieces. Packaging was one of the big arms, various kinds of metal works and so on. I mean, they were everywhere. 30, so it wasn't 30 factories of the same kind, it was a big variety. So that was also interesting to see how different they were. And I loved just walking in the, I mean, everybody should get a chance to go and walk in these factories to see actually how real stuff is made. It's just amazing to see the ingenuity of engineering and also how clever people are, on the floor. So that was a great sort of start. And for that reason, I had an edge in some sense to others because I have always had based on this experience and of course subsequent, I have a very strong opinion in some sense about what problems make sense to even study.
So is one key perhaps not to be too prescriptive?
I never said you should be doing, actually. I said, what is it that I don't see? Where is my model wrong? And that was enormous that changed the whole game with how you communicated with them, because I wasn't telling them, now you have to do this. I was saying, I must be missing something because I'm trying to replicate because what we are after in linear programming really in the end isn't, I want to get where you are, but then I want to price the resources. What are your most valuable resources? That you can read whoever you are, but that's what human minds are unable to see because it's a complicated combination. It's like saying, I know what the prices should be in the economy. So it's like saying, I know the prices that should. So that's what I can give back once I feel like I have now a model that is thinking like you, and producing what you are producing. So this is a highly economic way of thinking. And very few operations researchers, I would say even to this day, do it. But this was my way of dealing with it. And it both, instead of coming from somewhere from the central headquarters and landing on them and telling you should do, I got along extremely well with this because I was trying to help them solve their problem. I wasn't coming, and saying, we are going to want you to do this. So I was an economist. I didn't know it. I had no training really in economics, but this way, what I'm describing, any economist will recognize. We always try to understand first, why are people doing? So that's my attitude also to this question about what's happening in the politics. I don't want to just go and say, this is crazy. The assumption is that they are not crazy. They must come from somewhere. And what am I missing? I'm trying to understand it. And yes, the motives can be ugly. They can be honorable, but you are trying to at least understand why. So I've always been maybe too little prescriptive in some sense. That is, saying we should do this and this but it's still true that you really first want to understand, what has gone by and not just say people were crazy or something like that. That's typically a very bad starting point.
It's funny, I feel your answer obviously is very different than David Card's, but there are some similarities. You both talk about coming from this place of curiosity, but then you also both said it was, accidental almost, that you ended up in economics.
Well, curiosity, it goes hand in hand with accidental. I always ask questions, even as a child. My mother always said, why do you ask so many stupid questions? And my sister said, after the Nobel Prize, she said, maybe they were not so stupid. I still remember she got sometimes very frustrated because I kept asking questions about, probing sort of deeper and deeper. But yes, curiosity is absolutely the number one. I mean, that's why I'm still here. My curiosity hasn't really disappeared at all.
Bengt Holmström. And that brings us to the end of this special edition of the show, and indeed to this special Nobel Perspective season here on Monocle Radio. You can hear more from and find out more about the Nobel laureates that UBS seeks inspiration from by heading over to ubs.com/Nobel. And to listen again, hear previous Nobel perspectives and discover more about Monocle's worldview, it's monocle.com. This is The Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.